Right now, Russia is just leaving military targets out in the open, daring Ukraine to hit them. This is the location of a relatively unguarded Russian tank regiment. A couple of kilometers to the west sits a motorized rifle brigade. Now to the southwest a few more kilometers, we have a motorized rifle division. Further west, a regiment of the motorized rifle variety. If we jump much further west, here is our second motorized rifle brigade. And lastly, to the north, a final Russian motorized rifle regiment. Oh, there are also some airfields and other things nearby, but I need to draw the line somewhere. Anyway, each of these represents a prime target for Ukrainian artillery to hit. And, moreover, with only a slight exaggeration, Ukraine has a magic button that can destroy all of them. Yet Ukraine has not hit it. So why not? Well, the answer is one of mankind's most powerful artificial creations, the almighty line on a map. You see, by international standards, this is Russia, and this is Ukraine. And the only thing stopping Ukraine from crossing that line is the thumbs up from a man 7,800 kilometers away in this building here. But we are starting to get some indications that this could be changing. That's why today we will discuss why the United States has adopted this rule, how Russia has taken advantage of the incentive structure put in front of it, the weird public messaging that suggests that Washington may have plans to alter the policy, and the vulnerable position that Russia will find itself in if that indeed does happen. But we begin with why the rule exists in the first place, and we can summarize that with just 2 words: escalation concerns. Ukraine and the United States agree that Russia should retreat back to the internationally recognized border. But the disagreement is in how much risk to take on in pursuit of that goal. Ukraine, with Russia slowly capturing more territory and incurring losses from Russian artillery strikes on cities, basically does not internalize any risk at all because the war is already ongoing. The United States, in contrast, has an active interest in not letting Russia advance past Ukraine's boundaries. In the meantime, Washington also benefits from the Kremlin incurring military costs as the war drags on. Thus, we get a spectrum of possible risk postures that the United States could adopt. At the moment, the Biden administration has set the cut point about here. This represents a steady stream of military aid, but with the restriction that the weapons cannot be used in internationally recognized Russia. So, on the map, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea all day. But anywhere over here, steer clear. Now, nothing in principle stops Ukraine from taking an already delivered shipment of weapons from the United States and forwarding it to, say, Rostov-on-Don. The consequence, though, is that Washington could then cut future assistance. Indeed, the threat to do so has thus far kept Ukraine in line with the line. From the White House's perspective, the basic idea is that, the further that the United States participates, the probability that Russia will engage in some type of countermeasures against American assets increases. And, even if the likelihood of runaway escalation is low, that is something that Washington wants to avoid. Now, 3 things go into why the White House has selected this particular policy. First is how much it values the benefits of Ukrainian survival versus the costs associated with Russian reprisals. Those who place more weight on Ukraine would want to shift things to the right, while someone who does not care at all would fall down here. Much of the controversy surrounding the White House policy seems to argue that Biden does not care much about Ukraine. Not when push comes to shove, anyway. And maybe that is the case. But an alternative hypothesis points to the second factor, which is the expected response from Russia. Imagine that the CIA placed a report on Biden's desk, indicating that the probability of a Russian response as a function of US actions looked like this. Then crossing this particular threshold here brings about substantially greater danger than tiptoeing up to the line. If so, then this policy looks very attractive. Now, we do not know what this function actually looks like. And that is kind of the point. It may very well be that this is what the intelligence says. Outsiders do not really know, and the White House would like to walk past that line. But the CIA is recommending otherwise. The point is that these two possibilities look very similar from our perspective, and the observational equivalence there does not really penetrate the public discourse on the subject. After all, subtlety and public discourse rarely go together. Instead, the discussion seems to focus all on the various actions that the West has taken so far that have not triggered any serious consequences from Russia, despite having broken the red lines that the Kremlin had made earlier. And, be that as it may, we just do not know what the intel says about the next one. Everything can be fine here given what has been done before, only for the intel to suggest something much worse at the next step. More on that in a minute. The third point is the military advantage it affords Ukraine. That is changing right in front of us, though, and necessitates a deeper dive. More on that also in a minute. On that theme, let's look at what Russia has been up to lately. And actually, I could have otherwise made this subtitle Incentive Structures Matter. How fun! In both war and peace, people are smart enough to strategize in response to the rules put in front of them. Create a bad incentive structure, and you will pay the price. Now, in peacetime, that might just cost you some money. Like when in 1860, US Congress began paying a set amount for each mile of track laid down for the first transcontinental railroad. And so the Union Pacific Railroad Company's vice president, Thomas Durant, ordered track designers to create unnecessary curves in the pathway, just so he could charge Uncle Sam more money. Of course, that example is fun and silly, if expensive to taxpayers. In contrast, if you get the incentive structure wrong in war, you are liable to increase the body count. Right now, the United States is confronting that problem in Ukraine. The "don't cross the line" policy has been in place since the start of the war, but recently Russia has adopted a new strategy that exploits the restriction. The basics of the adaptation involve two things: glide bombs and cross-border infantry attacks. Glide bombs are explosives that standard Russian military aircraft can fire off from high altitude. The bombs then take advantage of the elevation to let gravity and glider wings deliver them to their targets. Tactically, the advantage here is that glide bombs can easily travel beyond 50 kilometers. Kharkiv is about 30 kilometers from the border, so Russian planes can stay far away from the danger zone and still be able to hit their targets. Financially, glide bombs can be fashioned out of stockpiles of old Soviet weapons and do not burn through pricey propellant. As a result, Russia has a seemingly endless supply of them. The second half of this is how Russia has prosecuted its northern offensive. We have covered exactly what is happening there previously, but the main point is that Russia is using its side of the border as a safe harbor to stage and launch cross-border attacks. This has allowed Russian forces to capture small sections of Ukraine north of Kharkiv, and it is giving Russia the range to pound the city itself, though it has not yet led to the substantial losses that the West feared when the offensive began. Nevertheless, this has resulted in a situation where some prime Russian targets are essentially sitting out in the open. Yet Kyiv cannot do anything about them because Washington has kept the easy button locked. To be clear, easy in this context does not mean easily win the war. Rather, we are talking about easily inflicting significant damage on Russia's military capacity and destroying the entire premise of the northern Russian offensive. As an example, take the HIMARS launch platform. If you want to avoid a thorough breakdown on the subject, here is a crash course. The common Gimler's delivery system has a range of 70 kilometers. The cluster munition version of ATACMS goes 160 kilometers, and the unitary warhead version of ATACMS goes 300 kilometers. In other words, each system can easily hit the targets lined up along the border, never mind support systems and airfields further back. Now, To be clear, the effect of the White House's restriction is not as significant as it may seem. Bombs, to some extent, are fungible. The US weapons used inside of Ukraine's borders free up Kyiv to redirect its own weapons into Russia. For example, the drones currently targeting Russian refineries and weapons factories may have otherwise been needed domestically. The thing is, though, that Gimlers and Attackums can just do some things better than the alternatives. To continue with that example, oil refineries are soft targets that relatively small drones can cause significant damage to. Hardened targets may simply need the bigger HIMARS boom. Put differently, Russia has a ton of vulnerabilities ready for the West to exploit, if Washington is ready to gamble on escalation. Indeed, it seems as though something like that may be in the works. Remember that third component behind the wisdom of the decision? The difference in military utility between having the rule and not? Well, the White House adopted the policy before Russia was exploiting it. Back then, the difference was notable but not substantial. But we are no longer living in that world. Correspondingly, we are starting to hear changes in US rhetoric. Changes that have been loud enough to be heard over Secretary of State Antony Blinken shredding it up in Kyiv's underground music scene. The first indications came during that very trip to Ukraine on May 15th, where he said that the United States has not encouraged or enabled strikes outside of Ukraine, but ultimately Ukraine has to make decisions for itself about how it's going to conduct this war. The media immediately picked up on a seeming departure away from the strict line-based rule and began to ask for clarification. And that's where the fun began. Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh then said that the Pentagon believes that the equipment, that is, the capabilities that the DoD is giving to Ukraine, should be used to take back Ukrainian sovereign territory. Asked whether it is a binding commitment Ukraine must make to stay within the line, Singh chose to describe it as a request. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said that our expectation is that they continue to use the weapons that we provided on targets inside of Ukraine. Emphasis there on expectation. It feels as though Washington is setting up a plausible deniability defense. We told them not to do it. So sorry that they did. Sure would be a shame if they did it again. And afterward, the United States would keep sending weapons anyway. Boom goes the dynamite. Then a report came out from the New York Times that Blinken's visit to Kyiv led him to change his mind, and that he was now lobbying for a policy change from within the White House. He is not alone among high-level policymakers. Republican Speaker of the House Mike Johnson told Voice of America that he is on board. So, yes, the leading Republican has become more hawkish than the leading Democrat on the issue. In addition to Russia exploiting the policy, Washington's push to make the pivot may be based on learning how Russia has responded to recent related events, specifically on targeting inside of the border. The United Kingdom approved the use of British weapons in Russia a month earlier. Freshly minted member of NATO, Finland, has been good on this since February. At the beginning of May, either Latvia's foreign minister or FM radio, not sure which, cryptically indicated that approval from states was also happening in private. In other words, the risk is being spread out. Meanwhile, Kyiv's refinery campaign that started at the beginning of the year and has kept marching forward since then has not led to a clear or significant escalation by Russia in Ukraine. If American weapons were used on military targets, unlike civilian infrastructure, why should Washington expect any worse? Also, yes, this took me forever to originally animate, so we are going to keep seeing it every time I have an excuse to show it. Anyway, this may be part of the plausible deniability framing, where the Kremlin knows that US weapons are being used, but simply does not say anything about it. The idea there would be that the Kremlin figures that engaging the United States would do more harm than good, and thus keep silent on Washington's true role, so that the Russian public does not put the Kremlin in a corner. Something like that happened, but in reverse, during the Korean War, when the Soviet Union went a step further by flying active missions, and Washington kept quiet to prevent the conflict from spiraling into something much worse. In any case, Russia has put itself in a vulnerable position, again, pending the US okay. It is not like these targets are completely defenseless, but Russia has leveraged Ukraine's handcuffs to deploy everything in this manner. To draw a comparison, on New Year's Eve 2022, inside of this building here in Makiivka, Donetsk, Russian soldiers began calling their friends and family as the clock approached midnight. Ukrainian intelligence picked up on the chatter, woke up the HIMARS, and 4 minutes later, somewhere between 89 and 610 Russian soldiers were dead, depending on whom you ask. Fast forwarding, Ukraine knows where a lot of similar facilities are today. Thus, if Washington picks up the phone and unlocks the easy button, and if Ukraine can discreetly coordinate a bunch of its HIMARS launchers, Russia could find itself having its single worst day of the invasion since it began. Final conspiracy theory note: there is a clear incentive to trick Russia into thinking that the United States is considering giving the green light, even if there is no real discussion about it. That might convince Russia to pull back even if it would not be necessary. In other words, we can't 100% trust that Blinken isn't playing us, that Austin isn't trying to be tricky, or that Singh means what she says, unless she is singing the praises of one of my books on the war. That's assuming that she's ever read any of them. I have no idea. Regardless, you can check the video description for more information on those books. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care. You know, if life were an absurdist comedy, there would be a simple solution to Ukraine's dilemma. Ukraine would hold a ceremony annexing a 20-kilometer corridor into Russian territory. Then, with the new lines in place, off go the explosions. When Washington gets mad, Kyiv points out that they were merely following the rules. Bombs only on Ukrainian soil. Hey, if you wanted something else, you should have been more specific by what you meant when you said Ukraine.